Hello and welcome to the next webinar in the series brought to you by Strengthening the Heartland. I am Amber Letcher and I'm so excited to see all of you joining us today. We're very excited to kick off this season of webinars with a very special presentation, one that we've received a lot of comments and excitement over. So I won't take up too much of our time, but I do have a few logistic items to make sure that you have the best experience with us today. So you will see in your display panel that you can have access to a handout of this presentation if you'd like to follow along as we go. You'll also see a link for a survey posted in the chat. We really appreciate your feedback. We look through these to see who's in the room with us, who's been joining, and then there's also a place for you to give us some suggestions, recommendations for future webinars. So please take a few moments afterwards and give us your ideas. We also have an email listserv that will be popping up in the chat. And this is the best way for you to find out about our upcoming events, all of our resources. If you'd like to be added to that email list, feel free to send us a message and say, sign me up. And then lastly, I will promote our YouTube channel after we get done with the live presentation today. It will be posted about a week later on our YouTube channel. You can find it by searching Strengthening the Heartland in YouTube, and we've got lots of great webinars there. So I think that is it through my list. Oh, one more thing. If you would like to ask our speaker questions today, feel free to type those into your questions box, and then I will relay those to our speaker at the end of the presentation. You can type them in anytime during the presentation, but we typically save those till the end. Okay, and without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Lauren Rocha, and we are very excited to welcome you to the webinar series. Take it away.
All right, hi everyone. It's good to be here. Before I get started, I wanted to begin this presentation with a little bit of mindfulness. And so if you're not familiar, quick little, I guess, instructions is go ahead and sit comfortably in your seat, both feet on the floor. You can have your hands relaxed on your side, or you can put one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly. And the reason I say that is because when we do our mindfulness right now and you're taking in those deep breaths, I would like you to focus on inflating your belly and keeping your chest still. And so that's going to be the goal while I'm going through some guided reading. So we'll start off with one diaphragmatic breath, sitting comfortably. I'm going to put one hand on my chest, one on my belly, and I'm going to inhale. And when I inhale, I want to inflate my belly, pause. And when I exhale, I want my exhale to be longer than my inhale, okay? All right, so going ahead, starting with our first one. Pausing, and then exhale. Okay, I would like you to continue your breathing, settling yourself into that relaxed posture, and I'll be reading out some gratitude mindfulness. Take a few deep, calming breaths to relax and center. Let your awareness move to your immediate environment. Pay attention to all the things you can smell, all the things you can touch, everything you can hear, you can taste, and everything you can see. And while taking in those deep breaths and paying attention to your environment, say to yourself, for this, I am grateful. Next, bring to mind those people in your life to whom you are close. Think of your friends, Picture your family. Picture your partner next to you, sending you love and support. And say to yourself, for this, I am grateful. Next, turn your attention onto yourself. You are a unique individual, blessed with imagination, the ability to communicate, to learn from the past, and plan for the future. You are resilient, you persevere, you are able to overcome any pain you may be experiencing. You are strong. And say to yourself, for this, I am grateful. And finally, rest in the realization that life is a gift, that you have been born into a period of immense prosperity, that you have the gift of health, of culture, and access to everyone around you with this technology. And say to yourself, for this, I am grateful. And the way we can close off our mindfulness is one more diaphragmatic breath, inhaling deeply. Pause. Exhale. Okay. I always like to start presentations off with some mindfulness, so that way it gets us nice and relaxed. And sometimes we come into presentations excited, tense, maybe a little bit of anxiety. And so mindfulness is always a great way to help us pause and be present and really pay attention to what's going on. And aside from that, there is some science to mindfulness. I think a lot of times there are people that will tell us, oh, but I know how to breathe already. Why do I need to practice breathing? Well, if you notice, I mentioned diaphragmatic breaths and inflating your belly as opposed to your chest. This is that natural breathing that we do, or we did as babies, and somehow we lose that. But when we take in those diaphragmatic breaths, the idea physiologically is to push on our vagus nerve that controls those systems that tells us, you know, fight or flight and rest and digest. And when we push on that nerve, it automatically sends a response to go ahead and rest and digest and to lower our heart rate. And when we're able to do that, research shows that we can trick our brain into thinking that we're okay. And then that in turn lowers our heart rate even further, or keeps our heart rate lower. So we end up in this cycle of a little more relaxation. Hence why we're very intentional with mindfulness. So a little bit of science to start before we go ahead with the presentation. But again, hello everybody. I am Dr. Rocha. I'm happy to be here with y'all. I'm going to be doing a presentation on how to promote grit and resilience in youth. I'm glad y'all are here. I'm glad you have this motivation and inspiration to see how can we build resilience, grit, how do we help our children push forward. So hopefully I can provide activities and exercises for y'all, as well as knowledge and information, so you can interpret that yourself and see how it might better serve your community with that knowledge. So some objectives, because I was a science teacher, so I have to have my agenda, my science teacher that's coming out. We're going to learn some overview of grit research. We're going to discuss some of our own experiences, so putting it into the chat too. Definitely process our own, so that way we can understand how to further foster grit within our own community. And then we're going to do some strategies too. We do have an activity at the end of this presentation. And so what's beautiful about this is that this is going to be recorded. So you can always pause it and go back to the activity and really take your time with it in case our time starts to run low here. Okay, so I always like to start off with a little bit of discussion. And first thing I want to get is who's in the room here right now today with us. And I suppose you can go ahead and put that in the questions or the chat. And go ahead and let me know if you're a school counselor, are you a teacher, are you an administrator, an educator? Let me know, like, what do you do, who are you, so we can see who's in the room with us. I'll tell you a little bit about myself while you guys are typing that out. Like I had said before, I'm Dr. Rocha. I'm from South Texas, from Brownsville, Texas, there by the Mexican border. I'm an assistant professor at Tennessee State University. I started as a science teacher and got my degree in school counseling, and then later my PhD in counselor education. And with my experiences, my culture, and just kind of now going through research, I have been more motivated to want to show the Hispanic population in research because there's a lot of underrepresentation there. I also thought of my own story and how I was raised, and that is what inspired me to go into grit and really research what are these components of grit and how do we foster it in others too. So let me see, I don't know, Amber, if you could let me know if anyone put anything in the chat or anything, or if they put any responses. Go ahead.
Yes, so we're getting great responses. I love the variety in this room. We have 4-H extension agents, we have school counselors, we have social workers, we've got undergraduate students who are here, program managers, looks like a psychiatric physician assistant, parent educator, after school specialist, just so much variety and from all over the nation. So just a really good group.
Yeah, okay, great. Seeing the variety, and I mean, it's great because this topic is very ubiquitous across different professions. So I'm glad to see that we basically have all helpers here in this presentation. So that's great to know. Any questions you guys have, please feel free to ask them during the presentation too, that's fine. And then any kind of engagement you might have, definitely come forward. I am somebody who tries to promote discussion and engagement. So if you have something to add to it, we'd really like to hear y'all's experiences too. So first things first, I wanted to talk about a few terms here because we use some terms interchangeably. So we have grit and we have resilience and we have perseverance. And I wanted to build on these. So perseverance is that persistence to want to complete a goal. You're just going to keep going and going and going. You know, some people call it obsession, others call it perseverance. We're going to go with the reframe of perseverance. Now, our next layer of that is resilience, and resilience is this ability to recover from a struggle. And that's kind of the key thing there. We're going to have to remember when we're going through this presentation is that when we're asking somebody to be gritty or we're asking someone to be resilient, we're having to acknowledge that they are currently struggling right now. And so that's what we're asking them to do, is to overcome a struggle that they are currently experiencing, which is extremely difficult in itself, whatever the struggle might be. So resilience is this ability to recover, kind of like this one event, or this one moment. The next one would be grit, which is what we're going to focus on more here. And the reason for that is because grit is perseverance over a long period of time. So whereas resilience, the definition of resilience is this moment of overcoming a struggle, grit is continuing moments of overcoming a struggle. So it's a lot of resilience being put into a long period of time. And you combine that with the perseverance, this persistence to want to continue going. And that's where you end up with grit. And that's why we're going to talk about some of grit's history, and we're going to discuss those character traits of resilience and perseverance and some others that are there with grit that we want to promote. Because when we look at resilience and grit, what are those other character traits that foster grit that we want to start with? So a question I have for y'all is, what do these character traits look like in your students or your clients? What, you see resilience, you see grit, but then how do you see it? What are the behaviors you see within your students and clients? So that's what I want to hear from y'all. that you put into the chat there. And while you're typing that out, I'll let you know that from my own experiences, seeing my students starting off as a science teacher, seeing my students be resilient, some of the behaviors I would see would be this dedication to studying or dedication to whatever it is they wanted to improve. So it's constant practice, constant work. It was asking for help when they needed help. And it was also trying to reach out to others that might be able not just help them with the content, but also help them emotionally, to motivate them, having those mentors involved. So that's a lot of what I saw when it came to what is resilience and grit within my students and my community. And it's very similar to what I see now as a faculty teaching in a master's program. And I've done some classes in an undergrad courses too, and I've done some doctoral level courses. And so it's that same thing of having this dedication to their schoolwork, having to acknowledge the struggle they're facing and being able to ask for help. So those are my observations. But what are your observations of it? And Amber, I'm going to let you take it away there and let me know what the responses are.
So we have a couple coming in. People have said maybe parents continuing to show up for their children even when it gets hard. Seeing clients work through their goals, like getting a job or graduating, because they are understanding the connection between that hard work and accomplishing their goals. Dedication, motivation towards working towards those goals. And then when they have a setback, redefining their success and then working towards it in the future.
Yeah, so you see there's a lot of similarities. So there's this universalness to the behavior of resilience and grit. The other thing I want to really shine light on is that y'all see that resilience and you see the perseverance within your clients and students. So even just being able to identify and capitalize on those character traits alone, y'all already have the skills to be able to push them forward. So it's looking at those character traits and really concentrating on them. That's going to be the first step to fostering that sort of resilience and grit within somebody. So being able to recognize what it looks like in your own community, that's one of the first steps there. So thank you everybody for sharing. Now, going over the history of grit a little bit, we want to see where it comes from. And so if we go back even to the 1900s, and you're like, oh my gosh, really, we're going that far back. This is a history lesson. Just a little bit. So the Industrial Revolution happens. Some more people are moving in to work in factories. Students are going, or kids are going to school more. And now they're saying, well, also we need to prep students to be able to be ready for the workforce also. And with all this coming into play, it brings light to psychology, because employers, teachers, they all want to find out, how do we know if a person is going to be productive and perform well? How do we know the person is going to push through struggles? And so since that started to become a question, then character traits were being researched. What are these character traits that promote productivity within employees and future employees? How do we test that? And so what came from it was the Big Five model, and those are 5 character traits that employers can assess, but this is from, like I said, early 20th century, so a bit outdated. There's more research on it, but this is where grit is going to be coming from. So the 5 traits, we had extroversion, neuroticism, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and openness to experience. And conscientiousness is going to be the key one there. So what happens is conscientiousness is defined as an individual's dependability and willingness to persevere. So when that definition comes to play, then we have Angela Duckworth, who you might have heard of or seen her book. She has a book out about her research on grit. She also has a TED Talk. And I think she has her own it's organization where they do this, they continue this research also. So Angela Duckworth, psychologist, she was also an educator too, a math teacher. She wanted to know, how can I promote resilience within my students? And so that got her researching more resilience. And she came across the Big Five model, looked at conscientiousness, saw that it was the most valid measurement for high work productivity, saw that it was about perseverance, willingness to keep working, dependability. But when she was looking at these constructs more, you know, resilience, perseverance, conscientiousness, it didn't really fit with the K through 12 academic setting of a student needing to persevere long term. So because it's when we ask like maybe our 8th graders to start getting aware of, hey, what do colleges look like? We need to start looking at your grades. What is your GPA? That is a long-term assignment for them to be looking at, because if we start anywhere, they still got to work another, you know, few to several years to get that diploma. And so how do we keep a student persevering through all those struggles? So when she was asking those questions, she looked at the construct grit and saw that grit would be the construct that was going to fit into what she was looking for. And so when she had looked at grit, she thought this better captured the longitudinal focus, that long term. And I feel like, being true to her math teacher roots, she went the quantitative route in research, and she looked at how can she measure grit first within students. And I know there's some people that prefer like qualitative interviews, like reading that sort of stuff. I love qualitative research too. I'm going to share some quotes with y'all later in this presentation, but I would say that quantitative still has its place in terms of scale development, because when she developed 2 scales, she developed the original grit scale and the short grit scale. When you do that, you have to operationalize the construct, meaning you really have to have a specific detailed definition of it, so you know how you want to measure it. And then when she went through the whole analysis, she was able to find these factors or subscales of grit, meaning these are probably other characteristics or behaviors you will find within individuals who have grit. And so the way she defined grit was a person's perseverance and passion for succeeding despite obstacles in life. So perseverance and passion were her key terms there when it came to grit. And then in her conceptualization of it, obstacles could include mental obstacles, where it's like it's internal dialogue, physical rigor, because she did research with West Point students, loss of support and resources, or any kind of challenge impeding progress. So really, like, obstacles could include anything. How do you get through those obstacles? And so looking at some of this research here, gritty individuals focus their skills and are not deterred. So they're very focused individuals. They diligently complete their academic work until they acquire the diploma. And then it aligns with previous research of connecting higher achievement rates in high school, leading to higher retention rates. So grit really helps keep your students in school, and not just keep them in school, but want to achieve, which is what we're always striving for as educators. And so within these 2 scales that she developed, these 2 factors she found were perseverance of effort and consistency of interest. And perseverance of effort is what we hear a lot of, which is the willingness to work, to remain wanting to work, keeping that perseverance on for a long period of time. And the consistency of interest, which is supposed to be that differentiating factor, it's that continuous high degree of focus. So we look at it, you know, having that perseverance and having being able to maintain that kind of focus. And it happens, we're human, we lose our focus. So that's why it's the differentiating factor of how long can you keep that focus, right? And that's essentially what I'm here to talk about, is how long do we keep that focus? Okay, so we're going to relate some stuff to grit, because we want to talk about the impact of grit too. So we look at grit and well-being, or grit and wellness, which to me is no surprise. They're connected to each other. So looking a little bit at well-being, it's a component of positive psychology that looks at the person's subjective experience, whether it's physical, relational, or personal. So this is like looking at all the different components similar to wellness. So one of the things here is researchers considered grit to moderate a person's well-being, meaning that it would have some kind of influence. If a person was gritty, or the grittier a person is, the more positive their well-being will be too. And so researchers compared well-being to grit and found that grittier students were more optimistic, had higher life satisfaction, higher job satisfaction, less work burnout, and less suicide ideation. And so this research, when you look at all these different studies, a lot of them were done with college students, some of them were done with high school students, they were done internationally too. So like DAT2 had Filipino students, and then let me see there, I don't have some with Hispanic research, we're gonna get into that later, but it was looking at to see how does grit affect people across the world, right? And this is what they're finding generally. So not only are you promoting this sense of resilience or being able to overcome a struggle, but you're also promoting more positive well-being within your students too. So having them be more optimistic, having that higher satisfaction, maybe feeling having more, that they have more positive relationships. So you're increasing that wellness whenever you're trying to promote grit within somebody. And so the other part of this is, and I'm going to get into how it relates later, is in a mixed methodology, they were looking at grit and they're seeing that whenever there's this well-defined goal, it creates a sense of purpose within somebody. And that's usually that drive, is having that sense of purpose. So that's one of the beginning parts of remaining focused, having that continuing perseverance and resilience, creating that sense of purpose within somebody. And I'd like you to take a moment and think about that. Like, where does your sense of purpose come from for your clients and your students? And maybe sometimes we're asking them to be gritty in this situation, and that's not where their sense of purpose is. Their sense of purpose is somewhere else. So how do we push that sense of purpose to where we need it to be? And sometimes we need to start with that. So it has to, at times, I've had students who need to help support their families. I've had students who are just trying to support themselves. And how do we move that over, or show them that by overcoming this struggle, it will contribute to that sense of purpose too. So we start off with that also. Now, when we look at well-being too, one of our activities is going to be about how do we increase wellness? Because if we can increase positive wellness within somebody, well, I mean, there's not really negative wellness, but if we increase wellness within someone, then maybe we can increase those gritty thoughts also. Now, along with grit, we need to have some cultural considerations, okay? So we talk about how, yes, there is this homogeneity to it, everyone has these similar experiences, but there's still these cultural differences, which is actually part of my motivation to want to research grit, because I saw that a lot of times the research was predominantly white Caucasian participants. There wasn't too much diversity within it. And in any construct, when we add this multicultural lens, it starts to look different. So DAT2 was one of the first ones to look at cultural influences within grit, reasoning that if there are cultural influences for academic achievement, there has to be some for grit. And one of these examples, and from my own experience, is looking at collectivist cultures. So if we kind of think back to what I was talking about, I was talking a lot about the individual, how do we get the individual to do it? How do we get them to persevere? It relates to their wellness. So the person is grittier, they'll have higher, more positive well-being. Maybe if the person, if they're more focused, they can be gritty. But what happens when you add that collectivist lens to it, which looks at what is the good for the community before the good of the individual? then grit comes from a different place there. That focus comes from a different place. That sense of purpose is going to be centered somewhere else. So we look at adding this multicultural lens, and this DAT2 doing that, they started with looking at like Qualitative, doing research with their students at a university, and then they created their own measure, which is the same thing I had done. And they ended up finding another, if you look right here, they found a third factor of grit, which is adaptability. And so that was one of the first differences you saw when you started to add a cultural lens with grit, which is that there's a new factor, there's adaptability to it. So we see that the definition of the construct, or how the construct looks, is going to start to shift a little bit when we add these different cultures. So right here, when researchers examined variables within a collectivist sample that correlated with grit, they used variables such as the meaning of life and sense of purpose. So even just not even focusing on grit to see what it looks like in another culture, but just looking at how other researchers compared grit in different cultures, they would compare grit to different variables. They would include family in the variable. They would include perception of relationships, perceived support. They included that when it came to comparing these variables to grit. You wouldn't see that in other studies when a collectivist sample wasn't the focus of it. So that's why that's kind of this added layer to it, is what does grit look like when we go across different cultures. And it's also the reason why I keep mentioning, what does grit look like in your community? Because thinking about the different organizations that help different groups, demographics, individuals in your community, thinking about what does your school focus on, what does your clinic focus on, and that shows where what is important to the community, or how can we help the community. That's how you're able to see, well, how can you better foster grit, because you're tailoring it to what's going to work for your demographic too. And that's a big thing. So we look a lot at the individual, and we're not pausing to ask ourselves, is there more to it when it's someone from a different culture or a collectivist culture? And so a little bit of a recap, right? So Dr. Javier Cavazos over at UTRGV, he's done a lot of research with grit and Hispanic students, and he found that having hope positively predicted grit. So students with more hope would have more grit, and mindfulness positively predicted grit too. So being able to practice mindfulness and be present, then that was able to increase their grit. And I think that goes a lot, for example, doing this gratitude practice, mindfulness, being able to find what you're thankful for, being able to pause and appreciate what you have. It contributes to those positive thoughts that will, foster grit also. So they also found that grit and resilience are also positively related to growth mindset, positive thinking, and self-control. And so I added this picture here because I wanted this example. Now, this is looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we know Maslow's hierarchy of needs very well. We talk about it all the time as counselors, as social workers, as teachers. It's always about, where are they in Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Well, what's not talked about very much with Maslow's hierarchy is that he had gotten it from the First Nations people, and they put out that they believe that Maslow misinterpreted what they found salient to their community in order, or what is their hierarchy of needs. And so they came out with what they believe is their hierarchy of needs and how it was misinterpreted. And so this is the comparison between the two. And if you look at it, self-actualization is first, and then community actualization, and then cultural perpetuity. So it looks different in the sense that it's about, do you feel secure with yourself? And then do you feel secure with your community, right? And then how are you culturally? So it's looking at the individual in a different sense. Now, I'm not shunning Western perspective of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There's definitely salience to both. Both are very important. We need to know that our students, do they feel safe? Do they have a home? Do they have food? Are they covered? We need to ask those questions. And then when we look at collectivist cultures, we need to ask, how do they feel when they're with their self-actualization? How do they feel internally? What's going on with their cultural identity? What is their cultural development too? Because that's going to be a big contributor to grit. And so when we go a little further into that, again, we go into my research, because when I talk about this, one of the things as a faculty member that I start with my class is that I let them know you're learning from somebody who has this identity. And I talk about my intersection of identities. Being a cisgendered hetero woman, Latina, who grew up in South Texas by the Mexican border. This is coming from my perspective. You know, go out, find other people's perspectives too. So a lot of this is why I look at, what does it look like culturally? Because I've had to ask myself, is this different to me and my culture? And it was. And not only did I get that from experience, but I got that from my own research too. So I've done qualitative and quantitative methods when it comes to researching grit. Similar to DAT2, similar to Duckworth, I did not reinvent the wheel. I conducted a qualitative study, got interviews from participants, found out what are their experiences of grit, so that way later I can develop a measure that would measure grit within a Hispanic demographic. And so, like I said before, I was able to find these different factors that go into grit too when you add a collectivist lens. Now, I mentioned collectivist, however, really any community that is very community-based, they use a community to build each other up. And this happens a lot when we have rural areas, or, you know, just maybe it's very spread out. Your community is going to depend on each other. So although I'm saying collective, just if your environment is one that is very community-based, then yes, this would apply to you too. Most likely. We look at validity. My validity of my studies go on to the Hispanic population in the United States. But I do like to think that it would work with collectivist environments. And it is my goal to expand my research more, to be able to include other cultures, to have a lot more multicultural conceptualization of grit too. Now, in my studies, something I found that was very intriguing, just developing the measure, if you guys look at it. So these are the questions and the different factors I found in my measure. Taking a look at that now, if you look at, I have like intuitive flow, conscious endurance, commit to action, community affirmation. And being a counselor, I have to find a way to conceptualize this. How can I further explain this, right? So the way I looked at it was cognitive behavioral theory. That was really how I was conceptualizing it. So I found that usually it seemed like there was this core belief that I'm going to finish what I start. I'm going to follow this plan. It's going to get done. This deep understanding within yourself that you're going to accomplish what you're setting out to do. It's this like this trust within yourself. And then the way this comes up, and when we talk about CBT, is you have this attitude, which would be a positive attitude, and then there are your automatic thoughts. And your automatic thoughts would include that focus. I need to focus on what I'm doing. You have that motivation, right? You know, who are you doing this for? I need to do this for my family. Okay, this was a struggle, but I can do this. I am capable. And when you have those automatic thoughts, it pushes you into action. So you become engaged in your work. You're maybe setting smaller goals that's going to help you reach that bigger goal. And then fourth factor that I found here that was very interesting came out with community. You know, I have emotional support, I have spiritual support, I feel fulfilled, I have a mentor. And this is actually what pushed me to want to use CBT to conceptualize it, because when you use these actions, according to CBT, usually there's a reaction from your environment. And when there's that reaction, It helps feed into that core belief that you are correct after all. So then people push through the struggle. They continue moving forward. They believe they're capable. They follow through with these actions. And it helps, it's usually to serve the community, to help their community in some way. And when they get that kind of affirmation, that validation from their community, it reaffirms that core belief of, I'm going to finish what I start. What I'm doing is making a difference. And so that was one of the key things is, does the individual feel like they're making a difference in their community? And that's not talked about that much with grit, because it's all about, what are you doing? What do your thoughts look like? But then it's like, well, how do you feel? What does your wellness look like? What do you think about your community? Do you feel supported? And that becomes more external factors of grit. And so that's what we need to explore more of, are these external factors. Now, one thing in my research that I always point out that I think was very interesting is that right here with community affirmation, you have support from peers, from community, from a mentor, but then I have emotional support from family members separate from this group right here. And my question is always, why do you think family was separated from the group? And that's not a rhetorical question, I really am asking y'all. You can put it in the chat. Why do you think that family was separate from these other groups? So I'm going to pause, let y'all answer that, and I'm going to move on to the next slide here. And then Amber, as the answers come through, I'll let you go ahead and read out the responses.
Looks like someone's thinking maybe it's because not every child has an active family that's involved. Family is more of a constant, so community might change, but family is localized, is constant for some.
Yeah, that is a really good one right there, that families are constant, because it's true. I mean, my community has changed. I moved from like a 99% Hispanic community to Nashville, Tennessee, very diverse, to a very diverse setting. But I mean, I talk to my family every day. My family is very constant in my life, and that is part of my grit, of my resilience to keep pushing forward. So I really like that one.
Somebody else mentioned sometimes families who we choose, not who we're born into. So maybe that's a separate community and family.
And that's actually, I've done a presentation like this before, and that is something I mentioned to school counselors is, we have to look for the student's family. And sometimes it's not the family at home. Sometimes it's this family of peers at school that they have more trust in, that's giving them the most motivation. So when you have a student who doesn't seem to have a lot of resilience, who seems to be struggling at home, not at home in their classes or in your clinic, and you're wondering like, I want to involve family. Yes, involve family, and acknowledge that maybe they also have a chosen family too, that will be able to promote that grit and resilience a little better. But thank you for that feedback, y'all. I always like asking that question because one, it gets my own brain going about, you know, why was it separate? And it also shows the salience of family and having that nuclear network for you. So apart from that quantitative research, there's also this qualitative research. And when I had done this qualitative research, I had found that there were 3 themes from these interviews. The first one being perseverance in the process. So this is like talking about perseverance in action. And these are some of the quotes here, like that determination, that fighting, I'm going, let me see, I need to move over my thing. I'm going to get down and dirty. I'm going to roll up my sleeves and let's do it. Pretty much almost lost about everything. And luckily I had already started working in the fire department, so it was just more motivation to kind of push through that, like, no, I need to succeed. So these are their thoughts, their motivation coming from it. So right here, Julia had said, I guess first of all, having a good self-concept, being able to think that you can do it. So again, being comfortable within yourself, having that self-confidence too. Andrea said it's more so overcoming your own insecurities and shortcomings. And I think that's, so a lot of times, and I think this is something to look at too. When I was interviewing people from the Hispanic population, they talked a lot about their own internal insecurities and having to fight through that, but also having to fight through whatever kind of injustice they may be experiencing, and then also fighting for their family too. And that's a lot of where their motivation came from. And so that was the collectivist motivation. So that was the second theme. So it was perseverance in the process and then collectivist motivation. And that's where they wanted to look at, am I helping my family? So right here, Martin put, I wanted to help people as well, but at the same time, I wanted to provide for my extended family, and my future kids as well. And so they could be a better generation than I was. So it's not even just, about the present people. It's always thinking about what does the future look like? Because I need to be the generation that pushes the next one up forward. We need to just keep pushing our generations up. And that can be part of that mindset too that you look at. Maybe they're trying to help show their parents that they appreciate everything they've done, and they're trying to push forward whatever future they're going to have, and future generations will have too. And I will say within myself, it's something I think about because I was the first grandchild in my family. So then I want to be a motivation to my younger cousins and show what it is we can accomplish. Right here, Mauro, even if you have neighbors around you, everybody wants to help each other out. So I think that's probably one of the biggest factors of their motivation, not necessarily social status or symbols. So that's that community factor we look at. And again, here, Alejandro also talked about future generations. So that's that collectivist motivation. And like I said, even if you might not be part of this collectivist culture, maybe within your community, it has more of this collectivist culture. And that's something to explore, is how can we help our clients or students provide for a community that's going to build that wellness, that's going to build that grit too. So these are some things to consider. And now the last one was relational support. Now relational support, this is where from the qualitative, I found this cycle happening. So relational support is the family, the community is now supporting the individual. So this is what happens. We talk a lot about the individual. Everybody has these, motivating thoughts, these positive psychology thoughts. I can do this. I'm capable. It's this kind of reframe. But we're human. We're human. Stuff happens. We can't be our best selves all the time, and that's okay. And so what happens here is that the motivation will start to decrease. It starts to die down a little bit. That's part of that cycle. But then as that motivation decreases, it's family, it's community that recognizes the fire, the potential within that individual, and they remind the individual, you are powerful, you're great, you're strong, you're smart, you're going to do good things, keep moving forward. And then it starts the cycle again. It feeds into their thoughts again. And so it's the same thing, and they'll want to overcome. So that's one of the ways that I found that grit is maintained. It's that support from family and community. And I mean, big picture is that's y'all watching this webinar. That's you, that's the teachers, that's the clinicians, that's everybody there. School counselors, you're part of that community. That's you pushing up the students. So your dedication alone, you being here at this webinar to learn some more material, and then whatever you're already doing with your clients and students, you're already working towards that cycle and you're pushing them forward. So that's part of it. Then it's just being more intentional. How can I better support you? What kind of support do you need from me? So that way you can get through this, right? And that's one of the big things when we look at community. We ask the person to support themselves. How can you get over this struggle? How can you make your thoughts better? But then that's where we come forward and we're like, you know what? Let me carry you a little bit how can I help build up those thoughts? How can I help you see a more positive outlook to this? And I think that's one of the key things or differentiating parts when you add a cultural lens, is that relational support to it. So we want to make sure our students and our clients have positive relationships in their lives in order to build some grit. And we have like 10 minutes. I want to get to the activity. This is usually my question is, what is your experience of grit? I want to know what your experience is. And I still want to know, type it in the chat. I'm going to move forward with the presentation, but please type it in the chat, and then we can look at them later while we're doing the activity too. We can read them out loud. So I want to know that. What are your experiences of grit? What have you seen? What behaviors have you seen within yourself that make you a gritty individual, that made you resilient? So yeah, take a moment and think about that, type it in the chat, and then we'll look at those. So here's some basic strategies. You know, I create a little list, and then we're going to do an activity. For counselors, you know, I have here using an intentional relational approach. So we build those positive relationships, and a great theory is the relational cultural theory by Jordan. There's a couple textbooks on it. That really lets you explore, what does their relational resilience look like? What does their relational image look like? And when you conceptualize clients using RCT and you're able to build positive relationships, then you're helping them build members that are going to be part of that resilience or grit cycle that's going to be going on, so they can help that person. Again, why we acknowledge when students have a chosen family. Using wellness to indirectly affect grit in relationships. So if we can somehow try to increase our wellness, maybe that'll help us out with grit too. And that's the activity. We're going to look at a wellness activity. Practicing self-compassion. I think this is the hardest one for a lot of people. This is part of getting over your own insecurities too, or self-doubts, having that self-compassion. For example, I will be very transparent. Even now, I have a lot of imposter syndrome, especially as a faculty member. And I have to have a lot of self-compassion that, you know what, I'm in a new career for myself. I don't see a lot of people who look like me in it. And sometimes I get homesick, and that's okay. I'm allowed to feel that. It is okay. I can sit in those feelings and process it and do some self-care. I can do that. Having that self-compassion for yourself is a big component to it all, because if you're just putting yourself down, you're not building that positive well-being. School climate assessments, school counselors, check out your school climate. School climate assessments, when you look at them, they talk a lot about relationships with peers and teachers, support from teachers, school safety, fairness. So if you look at different school climate assessments, you can see, do students perceive positive relationships and support from faculty and staff at your campus? If there isn't a positive school climate there, then maybe that's something to work on culturally within your school, is building that positive school climate, so that way you have positive relationships to build on that cycle too. And then there are indirect services to help teachers foster relationships with students. Maybe do family counseling to refer them to family counseling so they can build that family unit. Maybe you decide to bring in members of the community to do activities with students, so that way they can feel engaged with the community. These are definitely different services to conduct. Now, I talked some of relational cultural therapy here. I'm not going to go into it. This was a quick rundown of it, how to use it to conceptualize clients, what you want to look for healthy relationships. Look at this. I definitely say look at Jordan's book too with relational cultural therapy. It's definitely something as a counselor I'm going to be incorporating more into when I start finally seeing clients again. Consider that with it. Now, let's look at our activity. We have about 6 minutes left here, and what's interesting is usually I do this over Zoom and I don't see anybody. So I'm going to do quick pauses. And like I said, you can pause the video whenever you see the recording, and you can practice it by yourself, or if you want to see how you can do it. But so there's this wellness card sort, and it's by Lenz and Roscoe in 2011. Now, it's using this wellness wheel, okay? And instead of doing a typical assessment on paper, checking things off, do I feel this way, do I not? They take a different approach to assessing wellness here and being able to also develop a SMART goal for wellness. So let's go ahead and do this together. Now, I'm going to ask you to, have a blank sheet of paper, and you're going to divide it into 3 columns. And one column is going to have doing very well. Next column is you're going to put satisfied, and then the third column, not satisfied. So doing very well, satisfied, and not satisfied. And when you make these columns, now you don't have cards for you. It's called a wellness card sort because they're literal cards. You can put this 3 columns on a paper and have these cards set up and place these cards within the columns. And I think this is a very great tangible exercise to do with all ages because that keeps people engaged too, and a little more focused on it. So you're going to sort the following categories into each column, and these are the categories with the definitions. So that's I'm going to talk about this a little bit. We're going to look at the grit experiences, and while we're doing that, that is going to be your time to kind of go through these and place them. You can just get as far as you can get here, okay? And these are actually all the different areas of that wellness wheel that's from that article. And if anybody ever wants to see that article, you know what, Amber, maybe that's something else I'll include. I'll include the wellness wheel and the and this wellness card sort article too, so everyone can look at that. In the meantime, while everyone's sorting that out into the 3 columns, Amber, can you share some of the experiences that people wrote down for grit?
Yes, we had some really powerful responses here. People talking about how they maybe experienced like a personal injury and were able to overcome that and get into a college athletics team. Somebody had, a more difficult home life, and they were able to work through that and reach their goal of getting their education, getting through a master's program, which is just a really, amazing thing to do. Someone else talked about having some more self-compassion for themselves. So they're also identifying with feeling syndrome and trying to take care of themselves in order to then be able to help others and support others as a helping professional, which I think everybody on the call maybe does that professionally, or if you're maybe not in a helping profession, you have to do that for yourself too. So yeah, that takes a lot of grit, so a lot of resilience to do.
It definitely does. I feel like the hardest part is asking help for ourselves or being able to just help ourselves with that. A lot of my students that come to me when I teach stat courses, they'll come to me and they'll say, I didn't want to ask for help. I don't like asking for help, but I need help for this. And I'll tell them same. I know the feeling. I don't like to ask for help either. But that's part of self-compassion is being okay to ask for that help. And it's definitely something I've learned later in life, and it's something I've been wanting to teach to my students too, that come to my office, it's okay. So, all right, we're getting to our time here, but the next couple of steps in this wellness card sort include, so the idea here is once you identify where each card is going to be or where each category is going to be, you pause and look at where you're doing very well. And you have that reflection of, these are my strengths. This is what's going well for me. And you get to capitalize on that. This is even when you're doing this with a student or a client, have them pause and look at the doing very well column and use that moment to be that cheerleader for them, to show them these are your strengths. And it gives you an idea. Which strengths should I capitalize on with these students or with my clients when I want to try to foster more grit too, as well as then we turn to the not satisfied column and we see what's listed there. And so then the next step is arranging the cards in descending order from most important to least important. So you give that moment and you look at what is the most important thing to me that I would want to work on here. And when you do an activity like this really increases buy-in from your clients and students, because they're choosing everything. They're being able to choose, what is it that I want to work on. So a lot of times I will say people will look at nutrition and fitness, but other times it can be like love, relationships, family, right? But most times people look at nutrition and fitness, which is good. It's okay. It's a starting point, really. And so you arrange the cards and then you look at the one that is the most important, and it's really good to just pick one or two. Don't go crazy with all the cards. Maybe you can work on them for long-term counseling, but you want to start with just maybe the first or second one. And you create a SMART goal for that. So SMART, S, specific, M, measurable, A, attainable, R, relevant, realistic, and then T, time bound. So it's a very detailed goal, and you don't want to make it, you really want to stick to the attainable part, but emphasize that no goal is too small. So let's say if it does turn out to be nutrition, and that is something that's still very difficult, you want to meet them where they can be. You don't want to have to push them. You want to meet them where they can be, because it's also about them having that buy-in. And so it can be like, well, I'll have one meal with vegetables a week. Okay, then let's do that. Specific, it's going to be about adding vegetables. Measurable, let's talk about how much vegetables you're going to add. Make sure it's attainable, right? They're not going to do like a mountain of broccoli for that day, nothing like that. Make sure it's attainable. And then time bound, like, okay, it's going to be 1 day a week, or maybe we're going to do it twice a week, and that's okay. And then you pause and you're like, all right, awesome, now we're working towards our wellness, and you keep building on that. And then when they come back and they do it or they don't do it, you celebrate them, and then you get to work on that wellness with them, build off those strengths that you saw in their doing very well column. And then whenever they're ready, they can move on to the next part of their wellness if they want to see, or you redo this activity and see how the wellness has adjusted to over time. So this is the idea here. This is one of the activities that I like to do the most when it comes to even building grit, because a lot of times I think when we talk about grit, students and clients will be like, oh, they're going to tell me to just think happy thoughts, or to just keep going, just tell myself I can keep going. And yes, we're going to practice reframing, and we're going to do some stuff for ourselves too. We're going to work on our wellness. We're going to work on our relationships, because being this strong, independent, resilient person is not easy. Sometimes it's overrated, and it takes a lot of support from others to be able to build ourselves up. And I mean, maybe some of us can do it alone. That is okay, more power to you. But I will say that when I was able to accept the help and support from others around me, I not only became a better professional, but I believe I became a better person in my personal life too. And I believe that being able to foster these positive relationships in my life has made it very capable for me to go on ahead and do what it is I want to do, even despite all the obstacles that might be in my way or anything that might be impeding my progress. Having that grit to be able to do it. And I believe in y'all too, that you'll be able to do that and foster that within your students and clients. This is a very short list of my references. I started to add them and I was like, that font is way too small. So if you want the full list of my references, let me know. I'll send it to y'all. And then, yeah, that'll be it for my presentation. I thank y'all for being here. Any questions or anything like that, Amber? I'm going to go ahead and pause and let me know if there are questions.
Yeah. So I think in just the interest of time, I know folks are busy, lots going on in their schedules. So Dr. Rocha has kindly agreed to take questions via email as well. So if there's something extra that you want to talk about, or other questions there. We will be sending out a follow-up email, so everybody that's on today is registered. You'll get a link to the recording so you can go through that card sort again, and you'll also get just a copy of the handout and then a few extra resources that we're going to send with you. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Rocha. This was amazing.
Thank you.
Love to hear about, this more community-based collectivist approach to grit. I don't think you're right, we don't talk about that enough. So thank you all. And just a quick plug for our next webinar, which is going to look at non-suicidal self-injury. If you have not signed up, please do so. We'll be excited to see you again. Thank you so much, everyone.